Have you ever just stopped and wondered, where did that last thought actually come from? It feels like such a simple question, but it turns out it's one of the deepest mysteries there is. So today, we're going to go on a little journey to find the source of that voice inside all of our heads.
Seriously, try it right now. Just wait and try to predict the very next thought that's going to pop into your head. You can't do it, right? It's impossible. Thoughts just show up. They just arrive, seemingly out of thin air. And that simple, kind of baffling experience is exactly where our investigation begins.
Now, because there's no single, easy answer, we're going to need a map. We're going to look at this mystery through 4 totally different lenses. We'll start with the physical stuff, the hardware of the brain. Then we'll look at the mind's software with psychology, dive into the really deep philosophical questions, and finally, we'll check out the view from ancient contemplative traditions. All right, let's start with the most concrete thing we have, the brain. We're zooming right into that 3-pound universe sitting between your ears. From a neuroscience point of view, every single thought you have begins as a tiny crackle of electricity in the unbelievably complex wiring of your brain.
And just to help you wrap your head around the sheer scale of this hardware, your brain has something like 86 billion neurons. That's more neurons than there are stars in our Milky Way galaxy. So when we talk about a single thought, we're talking about an event that's happening across a network of truly cosmic proportions. It's just staggering.
So at its most fundamental level, this is what a thought is. It's not some spooky ghost in the machine. It is a real, tangible electrochemical event. You can literally think of it as a perfectly coordinated lightning storm flashing across your neural pathways in a very, very specific pattern.
And here's the thing. These patterns don't just happen in one little spot. Thoughts come from these huge networks of neurons all firing together. Your default mode network, for example, is what's buzzing when your mind is just wandering. It's like your brain's internal storyteller. But when you need to really focus or plan something out, that's when your prefrontal cortex, the brain's CEO, takes over.
This iceberg metaphor is honestly the perfect way to picture the most mind-blowing part of all this. Studies have shown that the brain activity for a decision you make actually starts before you are consciously aware that you've even made it. This suggests that the thoughts we actually experience are just the very tip of the iceberg, the final output of a massive amount of processing that's happening completely under the surface, totally unconscious.
Okay, so if the neurons are the hardware, what's the software that's running the show? Well, for that, we've got to turn to psychology. It gives us a great model for the mind's different operating systems.
The psychologist Daniel Kahneman came up with this brilliant 2-system model. System 1 is your gut reaction. It is fast, automatic, emotional. It's the thought that screams snake before you even know what you're looking at. And then you have System 2, which is the complete opposite. It's slow, it's deliberate, it's analytical. This is the system you fire up for complex stuff, like trying to figure out your retirement plan.
And this unconscious processing can be incredibly sneaky. Take this thing called priming. If you just read an article about cooking, you'll suddenly find yourself thinking about food more often, and you won't even realize why. Your environment is constantly, quietly planting seeds for the thoughts you're going to have later.
So what psychology shows us then is that our thoughts are kind of born from this dance between our fast intuition and our slow, careful reason. And both of these systems are constantly pulling from the same deep, hidden well of our memories, our beliefs, and all of our personal biases.
Okay, so we've talked a bit about the how, but now we need to talk about the what. And this is where things get really, really weird. We're stepping into philosophy now to confront what might be the deepest mystery of all.
This right here is what the philosopher David Chalmers famously called the hard problem of consciousness. I mean, think about it. We can map all the electrical signals, we can understand the psychology, but how does a bunch of physical stuff, wet biological matter, create the private, internal, subjective feeling of having a thought? How does electricity become an experience? Nobody knows.
And the proposed solutions are, well, they're pretty wild. Physicalists, they think consciousness just sort of happens when a system like a brain gets complex enough. Panpsychists, they suggest that consciousness is a basic property of the universe itself, like gravity or mass. And then idealists flip the whole thing on its head and argue that the universe actually exists inside of consciousness, not the other way around. There is absolutely zero consensus on this.
Okay, so after the brain, the mind, and these massive philosophical puzzles, let's turn to our final lens. This one isn't about looking at things from the outside. It's about direct, first-person experience, and it's drawn from thousands of years of contemplative traditions. This perspective gives us a really powerful metaphor.
The idea is you are not your thoughts. You are the sky in which those thoughts appear. And just like clouds, they're just temporary events that drift through this vast, unchanging space of your own awareness. They show up, they hang around for a bit, and then they just dissolve.
Now hang on, because here comes the really radical idea. These traditions suggest that the sense of me, that little person in your head that you think is doing all the thinking, isn't actually real. That feeling of being a thinker is just another thought that arises, just like any other. So there's thinking happening, but there's no central thinker in charge.
And so, from this perspective, when you try to find the source of a thought, when you really try to trace it back to where it came from, you don't find a little thought factory in your head. You find nothing. You find a silent, empty space from which the thought just appears. Its origin point is, in the end, a complete mystery.
So, wow, we've got 4 very different pieces of this puzzle, right? The brain's hardware, the mind's software, the philosophical mystery, and this inner perspective. How on earth do they all fit together? Let's try to build a final, integrated picture of where a thought actually comes from.
Okay, so a thought isn't just one thing that happens. It's a whole journey. It all starts with a trigger, something you see or hear, or even just a random memory. That trigger kicks off this huge cascade of unconscious brain activity and psychological processing. When that pattern of activity hits a certain tipping point, it ignites and it emerges into the light of our awareness, where we finally experience it and say, oh, I just had a thought.
So maybe we've been asking the wrong question this whole time. Asking where a thought comes from implies a location, right? A single point on a map. But the origin of a thought isn't a place, it's a process. This incredible, dynamic journey that starts in our biology, gets shaped by our psychology, and finally emerges into the mystery we call consciousness.
And so that's where we're left. That one simple question about a single thought forces us to come face to face with the biggest question of them all. What does it actually mean to be a conscious being living in a physical universe? That right there remains the great unanswered frontier of human understanding. Thanks for exploring it with us.